On today's IoT show, Royce says that she can deploy Azure Kubernetes on light devices. Tune in. Hello, and welcome to the IoT show. Today we have Royce from the Azure Edge Essentials team. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Vanessa.
So tell me a little bit more about what brings you on the show today.
All right, I'm eager to talk about AKS Edge Essentials. We just GA'd last week, so this is a great opportunity for us to share more about the product and the use cases and where it's relevant. So looking forward to that.
So tell me a little bit more about AKS Edge Essentials.
All right, so AKS Edge Essentials is Microsoft's Kubernetes platform for the small form factor devices. So when I say small form factor devices, I'm talking about devices like this, which is, I've got the Intel NUC here. So we are talking about devices in the range of around 2 vCPUs to 4 vCPUs and a memory capacity of around 4 GB to 8 GB of RAM is the target segment. So based on this, I've just put the slide together. So it's primarily the Kubernetes platform. You can run AKS Edge Essentials on a single machine or on multiple machines. You can run both Linux and Windows workloads on these machines, and then you can connect your Kubernetes cluster to Azure using Azure Arc. So it's all of this packaged together in a very simple app-style experience. You get it as an MSI, you install it on a box, you can install it on your laptop, and you can get going with Kubernetes right away.
So you mentioned running Kubernetes on these devices. Can you tell me why you would want to run Kubernetes on the light edge?
Yeah, so if you think about domains like the retail sector or the healthcare sector, what we have seen is a lot of customers are trying to modernize the applications that are running at the edge. And when I say modernize, I mean things like adopting new frameworks like HTML5, WASM, or even containerizing their existing traditional business applications. And so there is this motivation to go down that route. And when you think about containerization as a whole, what we are seeing is it helps developers, it speeds up their pace of development. You can use the same set of tools and processes and skill sets that you have as a team to build applications both for the cloud as well as the edge. So that's the primary motivation. And then when you think about orchestrating containerized workloads, that's where Kubernetes comes in. And we all know that Kubernetes is the de facto standard for orchestration. It has its own ecosystem with it. And so it completely makes sense. So Kubernetes has been in the cloud for a while now, but once you start applying the principles of Kubernetes or using Kubernetes at the edge, there are a bunch of challenges that customers run into. So let's take the example of let's start with an example of a retail segment. So maybe you have like a fast food chain restaurant across the US. So let's say you have thousands of outlets in the US. And in each of those stores, you have some sort of an application that's running. So you could have a point of sale application. You could have a bunch of other business applications that is used to track inventory or whatsoever. So when you think about modernizing these workloads, so customers are looking at ways in which you can include Edge AI into your business operations. How do I optimize and optimize my operations on a day-to-day basis, right? Yeah. So if you think about a retail outlet, so you could, for sure, when you think about examples of Edge AI, you could have an AI model that is developed based on the data that you're collecting from across the stores.
Right.
And these models are typically trained in the cloud. But then when you try to apply that model at a given store, there could be different nuances to it which impacts, which are relevant to that store. Like, for example, there could be an event happening in that locality, or the weather could influence the footfall at a store. So a prediction that's coming in from cloud-based model may not be relevant at that particular point in time at a given store. So that's where you have edge computing coming into place. Can I take signals and data from the point of sale device that you have, from the cameras that you have in store, and fine-tune my model so that I have a more realistic prediction as to what needs to be done at that point in time.
At that point in time, at that particular location.
Exactly.
Based on the devices that are at that location.
Yes. So that's where containerization, edge AI, and Kubernetes make sense, and how Kubernetes makes sense at the edge.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Can you tell me what that looks like under the hood?
Yeah. So primarily, what AKS Edge Essentials is that we provide an MSI experience. It's just like installing an application on your box. So you have your Windows machines. AKS Edge Essentials today is supported on Windows IoT Enterprise, Enterprise Pro, and Windows Server 2022 and 2019. So you get the MSI, you can install the MSI, and as a part of that, what we do is we bring up a Mariner VM, which serves as your Linux control node and also can double up as a worker node. And we also give you a bunch of PowerShell modules as a part of that. So it makes it very easy for you to bring up your cluster, manage your cluster, connect your cluster to Arc, validate your cluster performance and things like that. So that's in a nutshell. So the slide here kind of talks to it. You have your Linux control node, and then in case you have your Windows workloads, you would then bring up a Windows VM as well, which serves as your Windows worker node. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
That's great. And so you mentioned, that you're able to kind of manage this via the Azure Arc. Can you describe that a little bit more for me?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about Azure Arc, so when you think about customers today, this slide kind of talks about a realistic customer scenario. So if you think about customer Fabricam here, so they have infrastructure which is distributed across multiple locations. So you could have a bunch of infrastructure that's running on Azure, and then you could have a bunch of infrastructure that you have on-prem. So that's indicated by the rectangle here on the left. And then you could have workloads running in other cloud providers as well. So with all of this disparate infrastructure that you have, you're dealing with different tools for management, and governance and security becomes a hassle. And that's where Azure Arc comes in. So Azure Arc simplifies the governance and management of all your infrastructure, irrespective of where it is at, and you're able to manage all of that using the Azure portal, and you're able to abstract and reflect these resources as an Azure resource within the portal. So that's where Azure Arc fits in. And AKS Edge Essentials today is Arc enabled. So the moment you create your Kubernetes cluster, you can Arc enable your Kubernetes cluster, and what that means is that the cluster is now reflected in the Azure portal.
Brilliant. All right, so let's hop into the demo then. I mean, this sounds great.
All right, yeah. So I just wanted to share one of the things that we have been very particular about is that we wanted to make it really simple and easy to deploy a Kubernetes cluster at the edge. And I'm just going to walk you through creating a single node, single machine Kubernetes cluster on my laptop. I've got a cluster running on one of these boxes, but we'll come to that eventually. But on my laptop, I'm just going to create a single node Linux node only cluster running. So what you see here is the bunch of PowerShell commandlets that we have. So like I mentioned, it's included as a part of the MSI, and you would use this PowerShell interface to create your cluster, manage your cluster, and do all of that. Yeah, so what I'm trying to do here is that I'm going to create a single machine Linux only cluster. So it's pretty straightforward. It's super easy to bring up your Kubernetes cluster. So you first provide all the configurations that you need for your cluster in our AKS Edge config.json. So you specify what is the amount of resources that you want to allocate to your the Linux node. So for example, here I'm going to say that I'm going to allot 4 vCPUs and around 4 GB for my Linux node. And once you have your configs ready, you can go about creating your deployment. So this would firstly, so I've got the MSI already installed on my laptop. So once I do this command, which is new AKS Edge deployment, what we're primarily doing is we're bringing up a Mariner VM and installing, bringing up the Kubernetes platform on it, and doing all the compute and the network requirements that are needed to bring up the cluster. That's what you get at the end of this particular command.
Great. And so once you have all of this deployed, where it ends up on said device, on the device you showed earlier.
Yeah. So right now I'm doing it on my laptop and not on the device, but you could run it on any device.
Okay.
So we've got a cluster running on one of these boxes as well, and I can show that in just a minute.
Alrighty. It walks you through all of the steps. That's fun.
Yeah. So we have tried to simplify it as much as possible. So we do all the prerequisite checks, make sure that everything is as required, and then go about installing this to make sure that it is as reliable as possible. So when we talk about edge deployments, most of the time it is remote deployments. You don't necessarily want people going to all the different locations that you have. So that's one of the key aspects that we have tried to keep in mind as we went about designing the product.
That was awesome that you were able to deploy so quickly and with so much automation, and that the script basically checks to make sure you have all the prereqs installed. But you said earlier that you also installed this on this device, all right?
Yeah. So I've got a cluster running on this box here. So like I mentioned, this is the Intel NUC device. It's a very small device. It can be used in any of the IoT use cases that you have. So the example, I just wanted to talk a little bit about using Edge AI in the context of AKS Edge Essentials and using it within a Kubernetes cluster. So what I have here is the OPC-UA. So I've spun up 2 OPC-UA servers on Azure, which is pumping sample data.
Okay.
I have an anomaly detector that's running as a pod within my Kubernetes cluster here. So I've got all of this setup running. So what the pod does is it's primarily reading the data coming in from the simulated OPC-UA servers, running a detection algorithm to see whether it's within the range or not, and then spitting out data whenever the values are out of range. So we are looking at temperature sensor data, and so we have the pod which is running on. So this is the IP of the worker node, the Linux worker node that's running on this machine.
Yes.
And this is the port in which the service is running. So the service is reading the values from the OPC-UA server, running the anomaly detection, and then identifying if it is out of range or not. So this is a classic example of using it in an IoT scenario wherein you're able to process sensor data, run some sort of inferencing on it, and then use the signals to, maybe control the way your PLC works beyond that.
Makes sense.
I also wanted to briefly talk about, we spoke about Azure Arc and the fact that you can have AKS Edge Essentials connected to Arc. So I've got the cluster that's running on this box connected to Azure, and I wanted to just show you that. So this is my resource group, and we have got the cluster that's running here, represented here. So you have the current status of the cluster shown here, and
And this, this portal gives you insights into exactly how the performance is running, right, on this device.
So the benefit of having your cluster connected to Azure Arc is the fact that you can enable a bunch of Arc-enabled Azure services onto your cluster that's running on-prem.
Okay.
So in this example, what I've got here is I've enabled the Azure Monitor service. So you have the Azure Monitor extension that's available, and you can deploy this particular container on my cluster that's running on this box. And what it does is it gives me monitoring and insights for both the cluster as well as my container workloads that are running. So if I go into the Insights tab here, I can see data that's being collected from this particular cluster, and it's being surfaced within Azure Portal. So the fact that you could have thousands of clusters deployed across different locations and having all of that represented on a single portal is extremely powerful when it comes to edge-based deployments.
When you're deploying at scale and managing
Exactly.
at scale and having to
Yes.
manage, thousands of devices.
Yeah. So that's where Azure Arc really shines, because it helps bridge the gap between on-prem and the cloud, and you have a centralized single pane of glass view into the entire cluster.
That was a great demo. Thank you so much. So can you tell me a little bit more about why, what are the struggles with running, Kubernetes at the edge there?
Yeah. So if you think about Kubernetes and being used in the cloud, you have a homogeneous set of resources. You have a bunch of VMs that can be spun up and spun down. And that adds to reliability of running Kubernetes in the cloud. But if you contrast that to what you need to do at the edge, so there are a bunch of challenges that customers typically run into. So firstly, when we think about cloud native workloads, most of the cloud native workloads are Linux-based workloads. And then on the other hand, you have customers who have a lot of investments in existing investments that are running on Windows. Like, for example, if you just take about Windows being used in IoT scenarios alone, we have around 100 million devices that are running Windows today. So if all of these devices were to adopt cloud native workloads, it would mean that it is extremely challenging for them, right? Because they would have to have new investments in terms of infrastructure, teams, skills, etc. So this is where AKS Edge Essentials helps bridge the gap. You're able to run cloud-native Linux-based workloads on your existing investments, on your existing Windows boxes. The second thing I spoke about, the fact that at the edge, you have a bunch of heterogeneous devices. And running Kubernetes on a set of heterogeneous devices is challenging. And that is where AKS Edge Essentials, with the fact that we run in a Mariner VM image, it helps abstract away some of the underlying
differences between all the devices.
Differences between the hardware as well as hardware and the platform above it, right? The other key aspect is around limited resources being available at the edge. So at the edge, you're dealing with boxes like this, which has a finite amount of resource, and as opposed to the cloud, wherein you can always spin up a new VM when there is a lack of resource. So the fact that AKS Edge Essentials has a very small footprint, we support both K8s and K3s, and it can run on a device with very small specs like 4 GB to 8 GB of RAM, helps introduce Kubernetes on these small form factor devices as well. The other thing is about connectivity. So we have seen that a lot of edge deployments are either like intermittently connected or they have or disconnected,
yes.
Right? And so AKS Edge Essentials supports both scenarios. You can deploy it in both connected and disconnected use cases. And then finally, lifecycle management. So when you talk about deploying containerized workloads or at the edge, it's not just about the container that you're concerned about. You want to make sure that the entire stack is managed, supported, secure, and all of that. And that is where the fact that AKS Edge Essentials is running on a Windows machine, you know that the Windows host operating system comes with a 10-year LTSE. And above that, we have the Mariner layer, which is, again, managed and supported by Microsoft. That's the Linux distribution by Microsoft. And then we also support the Kubernetes distribution above it. And we make sure that we're always in lockstep with the open source Kubernetes distribution. And then finally, you have Azure Arc, which helps manage your cluster as well as your workload. So the entire stack, all the way from the kernel to your workloads, is managed by Microsoft. And that is a big thing when you think about the scale at which edge deployments exist today.
Very, very true. And if I wanted to try out, AKS Edge Essentials, where would I go to?
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, we are GA now, and more than happy for customers to try out the product, give us feedback. So you can get to our documentation using this link, which is aka.ms AKS Edge. And you can always reach out to us at projecthaven@microsoft.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Royce.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure. Thanks so much for the opportunity, Vanessa.